Yo te canto esta canción, viva la patria, viva la revolución. Oye boricua, yo te canto esta canción.
15 acres of forest, 34 endangered species, including species of the coqui, which is our native, frog, our native animal, our mascot, the Puerto Rican parrot, the Puerto Rican boa. 235 rivers and streams will be affected by this. We're talking about sensitive wetlands. We're talking about the zone of the northern karst, which is a beautiful area in Utuado, especially around that region that supplies 25% of the fresh water to the region of Puerto Rico, and more than 369 acres of wetlands, and very sensitive archaeological and historical sites of our Taino Indian, indigenous ancestors. Specialists have emphasized 6 hazard areas: seismicity, landslides, flooding, fires, and facilitated corrosion by natural acid drainage along the 8 kilometers of this Umata soil formation. Just to touch on the seismicity for instance, I don't know if I'm sure that folks have been in Puerto Rico in the past couple of years, but especially in the last 2 that I've been there on vacation, we've sensed some really serious tremors in Puerto Rico, and it's on a plate that's also connected to the plates of what happened in Haiti and in Santo Domingo. And so we're in a real sensitive area there in terms of seismicity, and some folks are saying, God forbid, but it might be just a matter of time when an earthquake or something serious, a serious earthquake might hit Puerto Rico. Many parts of Puerto Rico, as I'm sure Jose Angel acknowledged, especially having studied in Puerto Rico, are prone to flooding constantly, all the time. And then there's an issue of fires along the forest part of the gasoducto. And interestingly enough, the governor or the administration in Puerto Rico, Fortunio, just fired all the fire service, all of the firefighters that would be responsible for any fires in that area. So.
United Nations, it's not about going to the United Nations to have the United Nations declare independence. It's about the United Nations as the international body that implements international law. And at the present time, as I said in my presentation, we know all the limitations of the United Nations. But at the same time, it's what exists right now as far as implemented international law. And there's a body of international law that has to do with decolonization. How that body of international law having to do with decolonization, which is predominantly the main resolution that has to do with that is Resolution 1514 of the General Assembly, right? Now, how that gets implemented depends at every given moment on the willingness of the countries that are Puerto Rico's immediate neighbors to express their solidarity by taking different initiatives at the United Nations that maintain the issue alive. And at the same time, you have to have a broad movement in Puerto Rico in favor, not just of international law being applied, but what my view is, right, which is in favor of independence, right? But a broader movement could also take place in favor of decolonization and a fair decolonization process, a fair process of deliberation and consultation regarding that would lead to the Puerto Rican people in a real way deciding what's best for them. And I myself and people that are involved with this issue believe that if there was a fair playing field for the independence option, the Puerto Rican people would choose independence. But under the present model of economic dependence, colonial mentality, military occupation, repressive agencies of the U.S. existing there against the independence movement, control of the mass media, that's extremely difficult. That's why we need international solidarity, and we need the intervention of a world body that has to do with international law. And that's the way the world order is at the present time. Even though we don't like it, and we know the deficiencies of the UN, but that's what it is right now. and we expect a transition, a progressive transition in the United Nations to the degree that different peoples around the world that are living within their countries the class struggle, that hopefully in different countries people move to electing or putting in power governments that respond to them. And the expectation would be that at the same time, those governments, as represented in international bodies, would also have progressive, advanced thinking international policies that would favor self-determination internationally, and that would favor the eradication of colonialism, which has been recognized as a violation of human rights. Okay? Now, as far as the issue of the transition to independence and what independence would look like, right now, I mentioned before the Constitutional Assembly. The idea behind the Constitutional Assembly would be that the Puerto Rican people would delegate to their representatives in a Constitutional Assembly, in order that the Constitutional Assembly, the delegates elected to that Constitutional Assembly, deliberate regarding the process of decolonization and the status options, and come to a consensus regarding what the preferred status option is and what a transition to obtain that status would look like. And then, like it or not, the Puerto Rican people, or the representatives of the Puerto Rican people, would have to enter into a process with the United States government to inform that this has been a legitimate process of self-determination of the Puerto Rican people that has resulted in a conclusion regarding that future, and inform that to the U.S. authorities, and based on that, elaborate a process of transition. And in that process, of course, the international community would have to be an overseer, because otherwise we know what's going to happen, right? Now, I know that this sounds like this is all in the world of the ideal, right? Because we're counting on a couple of different factors coming into play, but that's just the way the world is working right now, okay? Now, the other issue is, well, you know, we can talk about, well, what we need to do is everybody in Puerto Rico take over what's theirs, and if that factory doesn't function in their favor, well, they take over that factory. But the fact of the matter is that the way the system works in Puerto Rico goes totally against the people of Puerto Rico empowering themselves in that way. So that's the contradiction that we face, and that's why I was saying before that parallel to this process of the international community intervening, quote unquote, in the issue, we have to have a process whereby we, the people who are involved in this movement for decolonization and the independence of Puerto Rico, redouble our efforts and work more effectively and work in a more unitary manner in order that we are able to educate the people of Puerto Rico. And that doesn't just mean organizing community to community. It means also work in the mass media, work with the cultural sector, work with Puerto Ricans in the United States. And that's the way political processes are. One last word regarding this upcoming plebiscite and Puerto Ricans in the United States. This upcoming plebiscite puts Puerto Rican forces in a very difficult position, because there are different reactions as to whether or not pro-independence forces in Puerto Rico should participate in that plebiscite. It's a two-stage plebiscite, and you know, it puts us in a very difficult position. But there is a sector in Puerto Rico that states that we should not participate in that plebiscite because it's a plebiscite legislated by the colonial government, and it's slanted in favor of a result in favor of statehood, which is what I was saying before, that under the colonial government, any consultation process legislated by the colonial government is going to be slanted one way or another, and we need to have something that's at least a little bit more objective and creates a more fair playing field for all the status options, right? So, yes, Puerto Ricans in the United States have the right to participate in any consultation, in a consultation process regarding the status of Puerto Rico. But it doesn't mean that we necessarily would have to participate in any process. And I myself, I grew up in the United States, I identify totally with different aspects of the Puerto Rican reality here, including the relationship and the interests of Puerto Ricans here in the status issue and in the independence of Puerto Rico. But my personal opinion, I don't think that Puerto Ricans in the United States should organize, mobilize, work in favor of being able to participate in this particular plebiscite. We do have the right to participate, but that right should be exercised, in my opinion, in a process that's a legitimate process of decolonization, of consultation of a colonial people in the context of international law. And in the context of international law, only nationals of the colonial territory should participate. And in our case, in the Puerto Rican case, what that means is that Puerto Ricans, that people in Puerto Rico, only people in Puerto Rico who were either born in Puerto Rico or who one or the other parent was born in Puerto Rico can participate in that process. That means that a vast number of Puerto Ricans who live in the United States or were even born in the United States can participate. And it also means that many foreigners in Puerto Rico will not be able to participate. That means Colombians that live there, North Americans that live there, Cubans that live there, Venezuelans that live there. And that's according to international law. Why? Why? Because why are these migrations from all these other countries in Puerto Rico besides Puerto Ricans? Because Puerto Rico does not control migration and immigration. It's the U.S. Okay, it's the U.S. government that controls that. So that's why international law contemplates who should participate. So the bottom line is, yes, Puerto Ricans in the United States have that right. My opinion,
Okay,
no, we shouldn't work.
Try to address as much as possible. Some areas I'm not going to go into because it's not my area of involvement. I'm not going to go into any particulars about the UN. I respect the work that's done at the UN. The MST speaks at the yearly hearings at the decolonization committees. We don't particularly see it as a priority, but we do respect the work that other compañeros and compañeras do there. About the legacy of the Vieques struggle, yes, it was a victory. It was a people's victory because it forced the Navy of the most powerful military apparatus in the world off that territory, which was something that was being fought for over 60 years. Now, I made a comment during my presentation talking about, how do you gauge what is a defeat, what is a victory? And I mentioned that oftentimes what looks like a defeat really isn't, because it's a school of struggle. And every time that you do struggle, there's no real defeat. I mean, the flip side to that is that a lot of the victories are really only partial victories. There is no such thing as the final victory. All life is struggle, as Juan Antonio Correger said, and so on, and so many other thinkers that are part of the struggle. So in the case of Vieques, what you have is that the U.S. Navy retired, but they handed it over to the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, which still controls those lands that used to be, that the Navy used to bomb. At the very least, the bombs aren't falling on, right next to the civilian population, and that is as a direct result of the struggle, of the massive civil disobedience, of the people that actually went into the areas of the bombing range and acted as human shields, of the people that tore down the cyclone fences so that the others could go in, of the people that left food and water on the trail so that others could reach the area and use their bodies as human shields. Among other things, I mean, the people of Vieques have continued to struggle about not being able to use their land. I think one of the biggest issues that they face is not even the control of the Fish and Wildlife Service, but that the island of Vieques has been flooded by speculators, real estate speculators, many of them not even from the U.S., people from Europe, all of a sudden arrive there and, they pay you an amount of money for your little house that, that you've never seen before in your life. You take it, and then you lose your house, and then, you have an amount of cash for a while, but then, communities fall apart, and it's not, the people of Vieques aren't benefiting in any real tangible social way because of this. So that, I think right now, that's one of the most pressing sort of struggles for the communities there. But there is still, the issue of federal control over the lands that used to belong to the Navy, and there's still some organizing going on around that. Unfortunately, a lot of the support from the mainland of Puerto Rico has sort of, just disconnected after the U.S. Navy left from that struggle. As to some of the questions about status that I just want to address briefly. I mean, like I mentioned, the UN is not our area of priority. I agree that it's really not. I think that it's complementary to the struggle. I don't think that it's going to be instrumental in the independence of Puerto Rico. I agree with the comrade who mentioned that you know, it makes more sense to see the working people of Puerto Rico to develop their own struggles and eventually to be able to take power and to establish an independent, democratic nation that works in the interest of the working classes, of the working people. And so in that sense, you know, the MST is a socialist organization. We believe in it's anti-imperialist. We believe in the independence of Puerto Rico. But we favor independence because we are socialists, because we believe in the interests of the working class and fighting for the interests of the working class. And we know that under the control of the strongest empire in the world, that is not a possibility. At the same time, we also believe that struggling for the immediate interests of the working class and developing them into political struggles is the only way to really advance the fight for the independence of Puerto Rico. So that's, you know, that's one difference that we have with other independence groups. I disagree with Olga respectfully. I think if there was a fair vote in Puerto Rico today over status, the majority of the people would not favor independence. That is the reality, and there are reasons for that. One of them is the repression that has existed historically. Another one is ideological, what Olga calls the colonial mentality. But another one is that in very real, material, tangible ways, the quality of life of working people in Puerto Rico improved during the 20th century from the transition from Spain to the United States. That was during the 20th century, during a very specific period in the history of world capitalism. Now, to address one of the other questions that was asked, if anyone who goes to Puerto Rico today and sees what's happening to that quality of life that we had during the 20th century is rapidly deteriorating, and it's only going to keep deteriorating because, as I mentioned, and Olga supported the statement, there is an unraveling of colonial capitalism, the model of development that was implemented in Puerto Rico in the 20th century, and that actually improved the quality of life of working people in Puerto Rico. Keeping in mind, of course, that a lot of this was also thanks to the escape valve of migration to the United States. But that's no longer, that model can no longer produce any material benefits to the working people of Puerto Rico. It's rapidly deteriorating, and as the crisis of world capitalism gets worse, Puerto Rico is going to get dragged along by the gigantic weight that is the United States. And the United States